Some stories are remembered, others are buried beneath them. When you think of Percy Jackson, you think of quests, gods, monsters, prophecies, but also survival. Because underneath all the heroism, there's something darker. Most people don't talk about how many didn't survive. Some names you'll remember forever, others you never even heard, but every one of them bled for this world. Every one of them left behind something that can't be replaced. This isn't a video about power levels or best battle tactics. This is about grief, memory, the cost of being chosen. Because in a world built on ancient war, death isn't rare, it's expected. Some went out in a blaze of glory, others died quietly, crushed beneath prophecy, forgotten by the gods who made them. And the pain they left behind, it doesn't care about screen time. So today, we're doing something no demigod ever wants to face. We're ranking every single death in the Percy Jackson universe by how much it hurt. Not how cool the scene was, not how big the explosion, but how deep it cut, how long it stayed with us, how unfair it felt. From the ones you forgot to the ones you'll never recover from. Because this isn't a list, this is a funeral. And it begins, as most do, with those whose names you never learn, the campers, the monsters, the soldiers of Olympus who were gone in a blink, but deserved more than silence. Let's start with the ones the story left behind. You didn't notice them, and that's the tragedy. Before we ever got to the Luke betrayal, the prophecy or the fall of Jair, dozens had already died. No names, no last words, no time to even be mourned. Camp Half-Blood may have been protected by magical borders, but the minute Kronos rose, the walls meant nothing. During the Battle of the Labyrinth, monsters didn't knock, they tunneled straight up through the floor. Somewhere between lines like, the camp was under attack, and we barely held them off. Kids died. Kids who were 11, 12, maybe 13. Some had only just been claimed. Some never were. They died running messages. They died shielding younger campers. They died trying to impress cabin leaders who wouldn't remember their names. And because Reardon didn't name them, we think they didn't matter. But someone at camp remembered. Someone was supposed to bunk with them that night. Someone saw the empty bed and had to pretend it didn't hurt. And this didn't just happen once. Think about the siege in the last Olympian Manhattan asleep. The sky burning. Monsters climbing skyscrapers. Not everyone made it to the final stand. Some died on rooftops, in alleys, fighting alone while the story focused on Percy. While we read about Kronos and the throne room, another nameless camper was bleeding out 2 blocks away. You blinked, and they were gone. And what about the hunters of Artemis? Immortal until death, and death came often. Some of them fell off screen, speared by Dracini, burned by monsters summoned by Jair, or killed while scouting. We get a name here or there, but most are just gone. Background casualties. The kind of deaths that don't end chapters, they end sentences, but their silence is the story. Because for every hero we follow, there are 10 others whose quests never got told. And that's why this tear hurts, not because we remember these characters, but because we didn't, and they still died anyway. They never had a prophecy, just bad timing. Somewhere between the lines of epic battles and world-ending stakes, there were kids with shaky sword grips, monsters just trying to survive, and demigods who didn't make it into legends because they weren't meant to. Not by the gods, not by the story. During the Battle of Manhattan, it said many demigods died, and then the plot moves on. But those deaths weren't background noise to the ones who saw them. Maybe a kid from Hypnos who barely woke up in time, or an unclaimed girl who died hoping her godly parent would reveal themselves just once before she was gone. We never get their names, but someone at Camp Half-Blood carved them into the tree at the edge of the training arena. During the Battle of the Labyrinth, a Dracena skewered a camper in the strawberry fields it took 3 words in the book to describe, and none to mourn. One of Dionysus's own, maybe, or a boy who never liked fighting but picked up a spear anyway. Even on Kronos' ship, the Princess Andromeda, the demigods following Luke, many of them didn't believe in Kronos. They were just scared. They were rejected. And when the ship exploded, gone. No name, no mercy, and yet they mattered. They all did. They were the quiet threads holding the tapestry together. The ones who patched tents, wrote letters to worried mortal parents, or passed out swords during training. Not every loss is loud. Some are silent enough to disappear entirely, and that's what makes them hurt. Because their deaths didn't make the plot move forward. They just happened, like real war, like real life. And now we move to something colder, not nameless deaths, but ones that should have meant something, and didn't. Deaths that were written too quickly, rushed past, or treated like punctuation. These weren't background losses, they were disposable, and somehow that hurts worse. Some deaths don't break your heart, they leave you confused, blinking at the page, asking, "Wait, that's it?" Because not all deaths in the Percy Jackson universe are created equal. Some felt like punches to the soul, others felt like the story needed someone to die and picked the most convenient name. Take Ethan Nakamura, for example, a child of Nemesis born with one eye cloudy and one truth in his heart. The gods didn't care about justice. He was right, honestly. And yet his entire arc ends with a single moment in the last Olympian, when he turns against Kronos, declares the gods should be better, and then dies instantly. One sword through the gut, gone. No funeral, no closure, no conversation about what he was trying to fix. A kid raised in the cracks between cabins who wanted balance, who didn't want Kronos to win, just wanted someone to listen. But the story didn't have time. Or maybe Hyperion, a titan of fire and light, built up as one of Kronos' generals, a threat to the gods themselves. And how does he go out? Swallowed by magical roots, restrained like a cartoon villain, barely putting up a fight. He doesn't speak, doesn't even burn anything. This was a being who once ruled the sun. Now he's a footnote. Then there's the way some deaths feel like narrative cleanup. Krios, the titan of constellations, supposedly fought to reclaim the stars, but in the end, he dies off-screen, mentioned in passing. The sky doesn't even flicker. And what about the Telekines, the demonic sea smiths who forged Kronos' scythe? Dozens wiped out in one underwater explosion. No names, no resistance, no meaning. They die simply so Percy can survive the scene. It's a pattern when the story needs to raise the stakes. Someone dies. But when that death doesn't ripple, when no one in universe grieves, when no lesson is left behind, when it could be replaced by a coin flip, that's when it stings, not because you're sad, but because you're not. These were characters with motives, lore, and power reduced to moments. Some of them had arcs that could have grown. Some were treated like villains when they were really mirrors. But the narrative didn't have the space, and now all we're left with is what could have been. And that might be the flattest pain of all. Some deaths feel like thunder, others like static. In the vast world of Percy Jackson, not every loss echoes through the halls of Olympus or leaves the reader reeling. Some just happen. Fast, flat, forgotten. But that's the thing about these disposable deaths, they should have mattered. They had meaning buried in them, but the story never gave us the time to feel it. Take the Telekines, those ancient sea demons who forged Kronos' scythe. These weren't just monsters, they were craftsmen, exiled and bitter, whose only sin was surviving the fall of the Titans. And yet, when Percy floods their forge, they're gone in an instant. No pause, no guilt, no line of reflection. It's played like a win. But the more you think about it, the more it hurts, not because you loved them, but because they were never given a chance to be anything worth loving. And then there's Ethan Nakamura, the ultimate almost. A child of Nemesis who stood for balance in a world built on favoritism. Someone who wasn't evil, but angry. Who wanted justice, not destruction. But instead of a redemption arc, he got a line, a blade, and a silence that followed. He turns against Kronos at the last second, offers the gods a warning, and dies before anyone can listen. And then, the narrative moves on, like his death was just another bullet point. Same with Hyperion and Krios, ancient titans, rulers of sun and stars, talked about like giants of myth, but killed like extras. Their presence should have been cosmic instead. Their deaths were logistical. No grand speeches, no dramatic cost. They were there to be defeated, and so they were. And that's the twist. These deaths don't hit because the characters didn't matter. They hurt because they could have. Because the world around them was rich, the setup was there, and then the page turned and they were erased like they were never part of the tapestry. And if there's one place where this kind of pain hits even harder, it's the place that was never supposed to be part of the war at all. Camp Half-Blood, the sanctuary, the safe place, the home. But even there, death found its way in, because some never even made it to the battlefield. Some never left camp. And that kind of tragedy, that kind of death, hurts in a way no monster ever could. Camp was supposed to be the one place they were safe, and that's exactly why these deaths cut deeper. For demigods, Camp Half-Blood wasn't just a training ground, it was a home, a promise, a fragile pocket of peace carved out between monster attacks and godly chaos, where kids could heal, learn, and for once, feel like they mattered. So when death breaks through those magical borders, it doesn't just take a life. It shatters the illusion that anyone is ever truly protected. That's what makes Lee Fletcher's death hurt. The head of the Apollo cabin killed during the Battle of the Labyrinth. A leader, a healer, not someone we knew well, but someone his cabin looked up to. And when he was gone, they didn't just lose a camper, they lost their anchor. He died defending the place he thought was untouchable. Then there's Michael Yu, another Apollo archer who fought during the Battle of Manhattan. One moment giving orders, commanding the line, the next gone swallowed by the chaos of Kronos' war. There's no funeral scene, no moment of silence, just another name left off the memorial wall the reader never got to see. But one of the most quietly devastating was Castor, son of Dionysus, twin brother to Pollux. He died when Kronos exploded the Princess Andromeda, a casualty of war, yes, but also of proximity. He wasn't on a quest. He wasn't chasing glory. He was just trying to help. And his death left Pollux alone, one of the only times Mr. D ever showed real emotion in the series. Because for all his sarcasm and wine jokes, Dionysus had a son, and then he didn't. And maybe that's what ties all these deaths together, the fact that they happen not during quests or prophecies or long foretold sacrifices, but right at camp, right at home. And when that illusion cracks, when the safe place becomes a battlefield, it's not just the characters who feel the loss, we do too. Because suddenly, we realize if they could die there, anyone could. The most haunting part of these camp tragedies isn't just that they died young, it's that they died before they ever got to become anything. They weren't quest leaders or prophecy bearers. They were kids in orange shirts who never got the page time, but still paid the price. Think about it, for all the focus on Percy, Annabeth, and the Seven, we forget how many campers fought and died in silence. How many were just in the wrong place during a monster breach? How many had dreams of making it to the next capture the flag match, or being claimed at the next campfire? Camp Half-Blood was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where demigods could train and breathe without worrying that the next shadow in the woods meant their end. But death still found its way in. Like during the Battle of the Labyrinth, when Kronos' army tunneled up beneath the arena and monsters swarmed the grounds. We know the names of the leaders: Clarice, Annabeth, Grover, but the kids who were too slow, too new. They didn't even make it to the page. Some were unclaimed. Some were just background faces during sword practice. But they mattered. Every one of them did. Even when the war moved to Manhattan, camp wasn't safe. That's why it hits differently when we think of the unnamed Apollo campers who died defending the big house, or the Hephaestus kids who didn't come back from the traps they triggered. These weren't casualties of prophecy, they were casualties of proximity. And then there's the emotional twist. It's not always the death that hurts. It's who they left behind. When Castor died, Pollux wasn't just grieving his brother. He was grieving the one person who made him feel whole. When Michael Yu vanished, the Apollo cabin lost its second leader in 2 books. That's not just loss. That's erosion. The slow fading of stability, one name at a time. And we feel it even if we don't notice it at first. Because the real cost of war isn't in the explosions, it's in the empty bunks. The names scratched into the tree, the weapons left unclaimed in the armory. These were supposed to be the safe ones, the kids who'd never leave camp. And they didn't. But not for the reason they hoped. They say Camp Half-Blood is protected by magical borders. But no barrier is strong enough to stop a broken prophecy or a blade in the back. And as the years passed and wars unfolded, more campers died without ever getting the chance to live. This final wave of camp tragedies isn't just about unnamed loss. It's about the ones who almost made it out, the campers who had story potential, budding friendships, loyalty, raw talent. And then they were gone. Lee Fletcher, the sharp-eyed Apollo archer, died during the Battle of the Labyrinth, not in a grand duel, but suddenly pierced by a spear. The narrative barely lingers. His death isn't mourned in slow motion, but the hole he leaves behind reshapes the whole cabin. Then there's Silena Beauregard, daughter of Aphrodite, known for her beauty, but remembered for her betrayal and her redemption. She's the heartbreaking bridge between this tier and the next. Silena should have lived to see a world after the war, but her grief over Beckendorf's death, her guilt as a double agent, and her final charge into battle wearing Clarice's armor turn her into a tragic icon. She died trying to fix what she broke, trying to reclaim the honor that got lost in secrets and lies. It's a poetic end, but one drenched in pain. And that's the twist that closes this tier. Not every death at camp was quiet. Some were fireballs of regret and redemption. Some left scars not just on cabins, but on the heart of Camp Half-Blood itself. Because in the end, the place meant to protect demigods became a graveyard for many of them. The tree at the hilltop still stands, but the kids it was meant to protect, many never even made it to their 16th birthday. The lesson lingers in silence. just because you stayed behind didn't mean you were safe. And as we move into the next tier, we'll look at those who did step into the spotlight, who did make their mark, only for fate to snatch them away in a flash. Because being remembered doesn't always make the pain any smaller. Sometimes the brightest flames burn out the fastest. Some deaths aren't forgotten, not because they lasted long, but because they exploded in our hearts before they vanished. Welcome to Tier 4, glorious but brief. The heroes who shined the brightest right before their final moment. The kind of characters you wanted more of. The ones whose deaths hit you not because you knew them well, but because you knew enough to care. And none capture this pain better than Charles Beckendorf. Beckendorf wasn't a main character, but in the opening chapter of The Last Olympian, he goes from lovable background guy to self-sacrificing war hero. One moment he's boarding the Princess Andromeda with Percy, joking about getting back to Silena. The next, he's hugging Percy goodbye and detonating himself with the ship's explosives. His death is instant, but it shatters the tone of the book. It tells us, this is war now. No more training, no more games, just sacrifice. And just like that, Beckendorf is gone. But everything after him feels heavier. The weight doesn't stop there. Michael Yu, the head of the Apollo cabin, dies during the Battle of Manhattan. He's the kind of character who only shows up a few times, but each time he's commanding, brave, and bluntly loyal. He falls from a building trying to protect demigods, and we don't even see it, we only hear about it after. And somehow, that makes it worse. It feels too real, like death isn't always cinematic. Sometimes it's just a name missing from roll call. Then we have Zoe Nightshade, a character who did get her arc, her backstory, and her battles, and still feels like she died too soon. A loyal hunter of Artemis, a daughter of Atlas, and someone who slowly let Percy into her guarded world. She stood against her own father. She protected Annabeth. She faced a literal dragon. And for all her power and pride, it's poison that kills her. Slow, creeping poison from Ladon's bite. Her final words to Artemis are like a lullaby and a goodbye. Stars. I can see the stars again. It's devastating. Not because she was weak, but because she wasn't. She just wasn't invincible. And maybe that's the cruelest trick. Even the strongest fall. These deaths may have come with glory, but they left wounds. They remind us that heroes don't get to choose how long their stories last, only how brightly they burn. And as we dive deeper into this tier, more faces will rise, demigods who proved their worth, gave it all, and vanished before the next chapter could even begin. Some characters don't need chapters of build-up to break your heart. They just need one perfect moment, and then they're gone. This part of Tier 4 is for those who stole our breath in seconds, whose deaths were not just sad, but unfairly sudden, narratively sharp, emotionally permanent. Like Lee Fletcher, head of the Apollo cabin before Michael Yu, who dies in the Battle of the Labyrinth. He's barely even mentioned before that, yet his death cuts deep because of what it represents. He's one of the first major casualties in the war against Kronos, a warning shot that the safe walls of Camp Half-Blood are no longer enough. Lee dies protecting the camp, no prophecy, no glory, just duty. Then there's Bianca di Angelo, a child of Hades, who never got a chance to be anything but brave. She joins the Hunters of Artemis seeking redemption for her family and sacrifice for her brother Nico. And her death? A quiet, cold snap in the middle of a junkyard, crushed by an automaton she tried to dismantle. It's not flashy, but it haunts the series, because Bianca chooses to die She knew she might not return from the quest, and she went anyway. Her absence turns Nico into something darker, something broken. Bianca's death echoes long after she's buried. Ethan Nakamura is another tragedy written in lightning. A son of Nemesis, he walks the fine line between rebellion and redemption. He sides with Kronos out of resentment, a wish for justice for the minor gods. And for most of the series, he feels like a throwaway villain, until he isn't. In the final battle, he has the chance to kill Percy, but he doesn't. He turns his blade not out of loyalty, but out of clarity. In that one act, he redeems himself. And then he dies, stabbed by Kronos for disobedience. In that moment, Ethan transforms from nuisance to martyr, a reminder that even enemies have hearts and choices. Even villains can break your heart. Then there's Silena Beauregard. Her story is soft, romantic, and then suddenly shattering. She's Beckendorf's girlfriend, the charming daughter of Aphrodite, the last person you'd expect to go to war. And yet, she dies in armor. Not just that she dies leading a charge as a spy-turned-hero. Yes, she had betrayed the camp once under duress, but in the end she chooses to fight for what's right. She dies proving that love isn't weakness, it's strength wrapped in vulnerability. Her final moments aren't just redemptive, they're symbolic. The goddess of love gave us a warrior. These brief yet blazing arcs from Silena to Ethan, Bianca to Lee remind us that some characters aren't meant to stay. They exist to shift the tone, to reveal the cost, to change someone else's story forever. Their exits leave craters, not cracks. And in the quiet after their fall, the war feels colder, the stakes sharper, because those who should have lived longer didn't. Some heroes don't just fight with swords, they fight with silence, sacrifice, and a story that ends too soon. This final stretch of Tier 4 belongs to those whose deaths weren't just tragic, but defining. Let's talk Charles Beckendorf, son of Hephaestus. Loyal, steady, quietly one of the bravest demigods in the entire series. And how does he die? Blown up. He and Percy sneak aboard the Princess Andromeda to sabotage Kronos' ship. It's a suicide mission and Beckendorf knows it. When they're caught, he tells Percy to escape, smiles one last time, and pulls the trigger. The ship explodes, and with it, Beckendorf. Just like that. He's gone. No final speech, no prophecy, just a hero who did what had to be done. His death sets off the entire final war. It's the spark that lights Olympus ablaze, and we feel it not just because we liked Beckendorf, but because he represents all the demigods who fight quietly, without prophecy or spotlight, but still carry the weight of the world. Then there's Michael Yu. You might not remember much about him, and that's exactly why his death hurts. He's the new head of the Apollo cabin after Lee dies. He's young, barely introduced, and then vanishes. We don't even see how he dies. Just a quiet note from Percy. Michael fell during the Battle of Manhattan. No glory, no details, just a name. And that's the point. The war doesn't care if you had character development. It takes you anyway. And for readers, it's a slap of realism that not every heroic death is cinematic. Some just happen. Some just end. Then comes Celine's mirror, Clarisse Larue. Now Clarisse doesn't die, but her arc brings death so close it almost shatters her. When Selena dies, Clarisse loses it, charges into battle screaming, riding a chariot pulled by skeletal Pegasi. She kills a draken. She becomes fury incarnate. And in that rage, we realize how much she cared. Selena's death transforms Clarisse. It takes her from comic relief bully to war-hardened avenger. In a way, Selena's death completes Clarisse's arc, even though she survives. Her innocence doesn't. Then we remember someone even less remembered, Castor, one half of the Stoll brothers. Not Connor Castor, the twin who dies off-page during the Battle of the Labyrinth. It's not a loud death, not a heroic last stand, just a quiet casualty of war. The kind you find out after the smoke clears. That's the heartbreak, the ones who don't even get a spotlight. But the final name in this tier is the one that ties it all together. Zoe Nightshade, daughter of Atlas, lieutenant of Artemis, warrior without compromise. Her journey in the Titan's curse is laced with mythic weight. She's stoic, cold, but deeply noble. And then she falls killed by her own father, the literal Titan of the West. Zoe is poisoned and dying, and yet she keeps fighting, keeps protecting the others. Her last moments are spent under the stars, Artemis beside her, whispering her name. Zoe is immortalized as a constellation. Her death feels ancient, like the kind that belongs in a myth, not a middle-grade novel. And that's the twist Riordan writes her like legend, because she is one, glorious, brief, gone too soon. And as we close this tier, we realize that some deaths don't just hurt, they elevate the story. They remind us why these books hit so hard, because even in a world of gods and monsters, mortality still wins, and it always, always hurts. Some names vanish, even as their legacies burn brighter than any prophecy. And as we close Tier 4, there's one more death that demands silence. Lee Fletcher, remember him? You probably don't. But Lee was the head of the Apollo cabin before Michael Yu. Brave, competent, a leader. And like so many in this tier, his death came too soon. Lee dies during the Battle of the Labyrinth, struck down by a giant. We don't even see it happen. It's told to us after the fact, in a brief clinical sentence. But when you step back, you realize how much that moment fractures the structure of Camp Half-Blood. With Lee gone, Apollo cabin is left scrambling. Leadership passes too quickly, and the weight of battle gets heavier. Lee's death becomes symbolic of a pattern. Heroes who deserved more. More time, more pages, more story. But Riordan doesn't give them that. And that's the heartbreak. These characters didn't die for shock value. They died because war doesn't wait. And when the war ends, it doesn't bring peace. It brings absence. The feeling that something is missing. That someone should be there, but isn't. And that sets the stage for what comes next. The heroes who not only died too soon, but were erased, not just from the battlefield, but from memory. If Tier 4 showed us that not all deaths get the screen time they deserve, Tier 5 shows us something even darker. Sometimes the world forgets you existed at all. These are the stories the history books don't tell, the names scratched off the plaques, the faces missing from campfires. We're about to uncover the noble ones buried by time, lost in the shadows of Olympus. Because in a world of gods, monsters, and legends, the most painful thing isn't dying, it's being forgotten. They fought with the same fury, bled the same color, and died with the same honor. But no one remembers their names. That's the horror of Tier 5. These weren't background extras or sidekicks. These were warriors, counselors, children of prophecy who didn't get prophecies of their own. Their stories aren't just tragic. They're invisible. Take Castor, son of Dionysus, one half of a twin bond that even the gods would envy. He dies at the Battle of the Labyrinth, and all we get is a passing mention, a whisper of a funeral pyre. But his death shattered his brother, Pollux, and it made Mr. D, yes, the god who never cared, break down and cry. Castor's death proved that even forgotten heroes leave massive holes in the people who loved them. But that wasn't the end. Ethan Nakamura deserves better, too. A son of Nemesis born into a cabinless life. He wasn't a villain. He was a counterweight. He fought for fairness, for the gods to stop playing favorites. Yes, he sided with Kronos, but out of belief, not hatred. In the final battle, Ethan has Luke's life in his hands and chooses not to take it. And for that, he dies, killed by Kronos himself. Ethan's story isn't told in parades or songs. It's buried under the weight of his mistake. But pain lives in that silence. And then there's Selena Beauregard, the beautiful daughter of Aphrodite who turned spy to protect her love, and died trying to fix it. Many remember her reveal, but few remember how complex her story truly was. Her betrayal haunted her, and her redemption was earned in blood. Selena wasn't a traitor. She was a girl torn apart by grief and love. And yet, she disappears from most retellings of the war, overshadowed by bigger names, louder deaths. Her loss hurts because it echoes the truth. Sometimes, the ones who give the most are the ones remembered the least. And finally, there are countless others. Children of Hypnos, Iris, Hecate, demigods who fought without glory, died without applause, and vanished without legend. You don't remember them. Not because they didn't matter, but because the world never let you. And that's the tragedy. When a hero dies and no one speaks their name, the death repeats over and over. So today we speak for them. Because in the next tier, we reach the ones we can't forget, no matter how much it hurts. Some deaths vanish in the footnotes, not because they lacked courage, but because the story moved on without them. Too fast, too loud, too big to slow down. But in that silence, there's grief. You blinked, and Beckendorf was gone. But Beckendorf wasn't just the guy with explosives. He was the heart of the Hephaestus cabin, the only one who could calm their internal wars. He kissed Silena goodbye and knew he wouldn't come back. He volunteered for that mission on the Princess Andromeda because someone had to light the fuse. And he did it with dignity. No spotlight, no last words shouted across the sea, just boom. And for a moment, everything burned. His cabin's pain, Percy's guilt, Silena's heartbreak. And then the war kept going. No statue, no fanfare, just a crater and silence. That's Tier 5. It's not about how loudly they died. It's about how quietly they're remembered. Take Michael Yu, son of Apollo, sharp-tongued, brutally loyal. He died defending Manhattan, fighting monsters on the bridge, holding his ground while others ran. He vanished into the chaos. And when it was over, no one could even find his body. There was no closure, no shrine, just a name crossed out in Chiron's logbook. Painful, invisible. And then there's Charles Beckendorf's mirror, Lee Fletcher, another son of Apollo, who died during the Battle of the Labyrinth. No spotlight, no build-up, just he was struck by a Dracina's spear. One sentence. But for Will Solis and the others, it wasn't just a sentence. It was the death of a brother. That kind of loss changes people. It changed Will. It made him a medic, a caretaker. It taught him that no one else should die unseen again. But even now, people forget who Lee Fletcher was. They forget he led his cabin into that war. Tier 5 is filled with those who carried the burden, paid the price, and faded from memory like smoke in a war wind. And it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about Zoe Nightshade. Not because she's forgotten by fans, but because in universe, no one knows her name anymore. She sacrificed herself for a world that doesn't even know she existed. She fought the Titan Atlas, her own father, to protect Artemis and her friends. She died atop Mount Tam, looking up at the stars she used to call home. And when she passed, Artemis immortalized her as a constellation. But even that is bittersweet, because mortals can see Zoe's stars, but they'll never know why they shine. That's the cruelty of history. Heroes become myths, myths become whispers, and whispers, they fade. So yes, Tier 5 isn't the loudest, but it might be the heaviest, because every single one of these names deserved to echo. And that's the twist. They still can. Because when we speak their names, we resurrect more than memory. We restore meaning. We let them live again, in story and in heart. And as we push deeper into this graveyard of gods and heroes, we prepare for the ones we do remember. Because the next deaths, they shape the fate of Olympus. They broke the series. They broke us. Some deaths feel like they were never meant to be remembered, not because they lacked weight, but because the world never paused long enough to honor them. You read their names once, maybe twice, and then they vanish beneath the avalanche of plot, prophecy, and main character survival. But if you stop, if you really stop, the silence is deafening. Let's talk about Halcyon Green, a name buried in the demigod diaries, known only to the most dedicated readers. A son of Apollo cursed with the power of prophecy, doomed to die the moment he uttered one. But instead of hiding, Hal chose kindness. He sheltered a young Leo Valdez, kept him warm and safe, even though it meant burning the last of his borrowed time. And when Leo left, Hal stayed behind to face the monsters alone. His death wasn't shown, his scream wasn't heard, but Leo remembered, and that memory shaped a hero. Then there's Bianca di Angelo. Yes, you remember her name, but how quickly she was swept away. She joined the hunters, found purpose, and then fell in the junkyard of the gods, crushed by her own curiosity. Her death wasn't loud. It was slow, creeping, inevitable, a lesson in grief. For Nico, her brother, it was the turning point. Bianca was the reason Nico turned inward, turned dark. She was more than a plot twist. She was the fracture that never healed. And yet in the grand tapestry of war, she's a footnote. She didn't die in battle. She didn't die saving Olympus. She died before any of it quietly, painfully, forgotten by many, but mourned forever by a few. And that's the cruel paradox of Tier 5. The ones who shaped emotions are the ones the world forgot. Like Castor, one of the twin sons of Dionysus. He died in the battle of the labyrinth. His death barely mentioned. He was brave. He fought. He fell. End of sentence. But his death changed his twin, Pollux. The usually carefree, chaotic Dionysus cabin suddenly carried grief. Pollux survived the war, but he did it half a twin, half a soul. It was a quiet kind of devastation. The kind that makes a god stop smiling. The kind that made Dionysus drink again. And then there's Selena Beauregard, and yes, she had a shining moment. A redemptive arc. But what makes her Tier 5 isn't how she died. It's how quickly she was judged. Branded a traitor. Blamed for Beckendorf's death. Whispered about in the shadows of Camp Half-Blood. And only when she died fighting for the camp, disguised in Clarisse's armor, did they call her a hero. But by then, it was too late. The doubt, the guilt, the shame, it haunted her. Her final act was redemption, yes, but it was also desperation. She had something to prove, and once she did, the world moved on. That's the heartbreak of Tier 5. These weren't just throwaway deaths. They were quiet pillars holding up louder stories. If you remove them, the whole house of Olympus trembles. But no one looks back. No one builds them shrines. No one names quests after them. They're the invisible blood price of every major victory. The ones whose deaths didn't sell books, but made heroes. The twist is, they're not erased by time. They're erased by us. Unless we fight that erasure, unless we say their names. Unless we remember Hal's warmth, Bianca's silence, Castor's twinless ending, and Selena's complicated, beautiful fall. Because those names, they matter. They matter more than monsters, more than prophecies, more than medals. They were human, and they hurt, and they hoped, and they died. But not in vain. And now, we step beyond the forgotten. Some deaths are quiet, and some are silenced. Not by magic, not by fate, but by the crushing weight of bigger stories, louder names, flashier endings, and the kind of glory that drowns out the subtle. But here, at the close of Tier 5, we hold a moment of silence for those who were never supposed to be remembered, yet must be. Ethan Nakamura, son of Nemesis, child of revenge, proof that justice can be corrupted by pain. His death at the Battle of Manhattan was sudden, but his life was a slow burn tragedy. A boy cast aside, marked by his godly parents' bitterness, ignored by the heroes because he didn't fit their mold. Ethan wanted balance, not chaos, not power, balance. But he aligned with Kronos out of desperation because Olympus left too many kids like him in the dark. And when he turned on Kronos in the final moment, saving Percy's life, he didn't get a statue, or a song, or a plaque at camp. He got a line in the book, a name on a list. That's Tier 5. And it gets worse. Let's not forget Charles Beckendorf. Yes, he's remembered more than others, but even then, mostly as the guy who blew up the ship. His death was noble, yes, but also brushed aside by the main quest line. Beckendorf was brave, funny, dependable, and in love with Selena, and he walked into certain death because the mission needed it, not for prophecy, not for fate, for strategy. He died a soldier's death, and while it mattered to the war effort, it barely resonated beyond that initial blast. His sacrifice became background noise to bigger moments. Even Clarice, his closest friend, was too blinded by rage to properly mourn him. And let's talk about Lee Fletcher, head of the Apollo cabin killed during the Battle of the Labyrinth. His death treated like a narrative speed bump. He was a leader. He held the line when everything else fell. But once he was gone, no backstory, no mourning arc, no flashback, just silence. And somewhere in that silence, his name faded from most readers' memory. That's what makes these deaths so cruel. They weren't insignificant. They were just treated that way. And the tension rises when you realize how many more there are. Michael Yu, also from the Apollo cabin, fell from the Williamsburg Bridge. He died trying to lead, trying to keep order, trying to do the right thing. And he plummeted. No glory, just gravity, no closure, just a gap in the next chapter. His name vanishes like wind off the page. Even Zoe Nightshade, who technically could be considered Tier 6 for her mythic resonance, flirts with the borders of Tier 5 because of how quickly she's forgotten. A daughter of Atlas, a hunter of Artemis. She gave everything to protect Annabeth. She killed her own father. She died under the stars and was turned into one. Beautiful, symbolic, and somehow still underappreciated. Ask a casual fan and see if they remember her last words. Most won't. Because she was ancient, because she was other, because she was too far from Percy's inner circle. Her death hurt. It changed things, but it didn't stay with most people. That's Tier 5's heartbreak. These aren't just dead characters, they are moral wounds. They represent all the side stories that never got enough time, all the kids of minor gods who bled for a war they didn't start, all the leaders who didn't get remembered, and all the sacrifices that didn't fit into a neat prophecy box. And here's the twist, this was the point. The gods didn't care who lived or died. Olympus was too busy celebrating its own survival. Heroes like Percy couldn't save everyone, and Rick Riordan didn't write this as an oversight. He wrote it as truth. The war leaves behind the quiet dead, the ones who mattered most to someone, but not to the world. And that realization, it hurts. But it also matters, because it forces us to look deeper. It challenges us to remember names not carved in marble, but in the hearts of those left behind. It makes us ask, who are we forgetting in our own stories? Which real people, real sacrifices, real names are falling through the cracks? And if Percy Jackson taught us anything, it's this. Memory is a form of honor. So say their names. Lee, Michael, Hal, Ethan, Silena, Beckendorf, Castor, Zoe. Not as trivia, but as testament. Their stories may have ended in whispers, but they shaped the sound of everything that followed. And now, with their memory held tight, we enter Tier 6, where the deaths weren't just painful, they shook Olympus to its core. These are the moments the story couldn't move on from. Deaths that didn't just hurt, they rewrote the world. Some deaths in Percy Jackson leave a scar, others leave a crater. From the moment the lightning bolt first crackled in the sky, the series made one thing clear. Death wasn't just a consequence, it was a pivot. And in Tier 6, we enter the deaths that didn't just sting, they shifted the path of Olympus. These were losses that forced characters to evolve, that redefined alliances, shattered innocence, and echoed long after the funeral pyres burned out. The pain wasn't just personal, it was plot-altering. Start with Selena Beauregard. On the surface, a daughter of Aphrodite, sweet, beautiful, loyal. But beneath the charm, a girl drowning in guilt, torn between love and betrayal. Her undercover work for Kronos, driven by love for Beckendorf and fear for his safety, spiraled into a redemption arc that culminated in her charging into battle in Clarisse's stolen armor. Her death wasn't just noble, it was catalytic. Her confession broke the morale of the enemy and reignited the rage of Clarisse, who finally entered the battlefield and turned the tide of the war. That's not just a character death. That's a battlefield twist born from emotional collapse. Selena's story forced even the gods to question the line between traitor and hero. And what about Zoe Nightshade? Yes, she hovers at the border of Tier 5. But make no mistake, her death restructured destiny. As a hunter of Artemis, she was already living on borrowed time. But when she stood against her own father, Atlas, to save Annabeth, she didn't just die for the quest. She died to restore the stars. Her body broke, but Artemis immortalized her in the night sky, giving her a place above the world she died to protect. More importantly, her sacrifice shifted the emotional center of Thalia, Annabeth, and Artemis, bonding them forever in grief. Even Percy's understanding of loyalty, family, and sacrifice deepened in that moment. And then there's Luke Castellan, the traitor, the lightning thief, the vessel of Kronos. His entire arc was a slow-motion tragedy, and his death at the end of The Last Olympian was more than a physical act. It was a thematic revelation. For 5 books, we believed Luke was the enemy. And in his final breath, we realized he was the victim of abandonment, of prophecy, of expectation. When Annabeth reminded him who he used to be, the boy who promised never to let her get hurt. He chose self-destruction over domination. His death didn't just kill Kronos. It healed the prophecy. It proved that choice matters more than fate, that even the broken can be redeemed. Luke's death was the hinge of the entire series, the death that made Percy's mercy matter. But if we're talking about ripple effects, let's go even deeper. Bob, the Titan who once went by Epictetus. When Percy and Annabeth fall into Tartarus, they're supposed to be alone. But Bob, once an enemy, now reborn with a clean slate, chooses to remember friendship instead of fury. His decision to protect them, to hold the darkness at bay, is what made their escape possible. Bob's death was a whisper in the void, unseen by Olympus, unsung by the heroes, but known to us. It was the price of survival, and it marked a shift in the series' tone, no longer just battles of swords and monsters, but moral complexity. Bob didn't have to help, but he did, and in doing so, he died knowing he mattered. And then there's the death that isn't talked about enough. Bianca di Angelo, a child of Hades, taken too soon, burdened with a brother to protect, and a prophecy she never wanted. Her choice to join the Hunters of Artemis was her attempt to find peace, to escape the crushing responsibility she felt. But when she died retrieving the giant automaton Talos, the impact reverberated. Nico, her little brother, spiraled into grief, rage, and isolation. Her death pushed Nico into darkness. It made him mistrust the heroes. It made him question the gods. And eventually, it made him powerful. Bianca didn't die in vain. Her death made Nico who he was, the boy who walked through shadows and returned a hero. These aren't just deaths, they're turning points. Each one forced the narrative to swerve. Each one demanded a reckoning. They weren't about shock value, they were about emotional consequences. They redefined characters, they restructured alliances, they challenged the gods. And as we dig deeper into Tier 6, the pattern becomes clear. In this world, death isn't just tragic, it's transformative. And in the next section, we'll uncover even more the deaths that shook foundations, cracked Olympus, and exposed the fault lines beneath the hero myth. The ones that didn't just change the story, they rewrote it. There's a silence that falls after a game-changing death, not the silence of grief, but the kind that reshapes everything that follows. And in this tier, that silence roars, because the next wave of deaths didn't just sadden us, they split the narrative in half. Let's talk about Charles Beckendorf, a son of Hephaestus, strong, reliable, never the center of attention, but he lit the fuse of the final war. His death on the Princess Andromeda, a suicide mission to take out Kronos' ship, was more than just noble. It was necessary. And it destroyed Percy. For the first time, Percy wasn't just reacting to loss. He felt responsible for it. He questioned the plan. He blamed himself. And that guilt bled into everything that followed his choices in the last Olympian. His restraint, his refusal to accept easy wins. Beckendorf's death hardened him. But it also lit the fuse for Selena's redemption, Clarissa's vengeance, and the fall of Kronos' fleet. It was one life traded for dozens, and it made the war personal. Then there's Ethan Nakamura, another side character at first glance, a child of Nemesis, bitter about being cast aside. But his death was more than just a redemption beat. It was a philosophical gut punch. Ethan represented the others, the half-bloods from minor gods, the forgotten, the neglected. And when he finally turned on Kronos, only to be struck down mid-sentence, his final words, "You said your enemies would be destroyed, but you never said your own people would be next," shook the truth into the open. Kronos didn't care about justice. He cared about conquest. Ethan's death exposed the lie behind the rebellion and made it impossible for anyone to pretend Kronos was the answer. In a single, quiet moment, the whole revolution cracked. And now, we talk about Calypso. Not her death, but the death of her freedom. When Percy left her on that island after Battle of the Labyrinth, it wasn't just a romantic subplot. It was an injustice. She had helped him heal. She had saved him. And yet, because of a curse, she was doomed to be left behind again. That moment marked a kind of emotional death. The idea that love and goodness could guarantee you happiness was shattered. Her abandonment became the fuel for her bitterness when she returned in the Heroes of Olympus series. It altered Leo's arc, flipped the dynamic of their romance, and added a sharp, tragic weight to what would have otherwise been a happy ending. Her absence and the pain it represented was a haunting reminder of what the gods never fixed. And speaking of tragic echoes, let's revisit Bob and Damascene. Their final stand in Tartarus, protecting Annabeth and Percy, was a heroic sacrifice on the grandest scale. But it also laid bare one of the darkest truths in the series, that redemption is rarely rewarded. These two, a titan and a giant, former enemies, died in a place where no songs would ever be sung. No statues, no stories, only readers knew. And that was the point. The world didn't know. Olympus didn't care. But we did. Their sacrifice exposed the injustice of invisibility. That sometimes those who save the world are forgotten by it. And that changes how we view every quest that follows. But none of these losses hit as deep or as unexpectedly as Jason Grace, a Roman demigod, a leader, a symbol of unity between Camp Jupiter and Camp Half-Blood. His death in the burning maze was a narrative thunderbolt. Heroes didn't just die in climaxes anymore. They died in the middle of things. Jason didn't die protecting the world. He died protecting one friend. His sacrifice to save Piper and the other students was shocking, not because it was flashy, but because it was intimate. He had plans. He had a future. And it was ripped away. His death left the Seven fractured. It broke Piper's heart. It deepened Apollo's despair. It told us that even gods in human form could lose, and it taught us that prophecies don't protect, they only warn. Jason's fall forced every reader to reevaluate the tone of the series. We were no longer in safe territory. From here on out, anyone could die. And speaking of gods and warnings, what about Hestia, the goddess of the hearth? She didn't die physically, but her role as the forgotten Olympian, the one who gave up her throne so others could shine, redefined the entire power structure. Her choice to be small, to stay behind, to protect the flame while others warred, it reframed the whole series. Suddenly, strength wasn't about who fought the hardest, it was about who kept the light on, and in many ways, her self-erasure was a form of sacrifice that left ripples in every cabin, every quest, every home. These aren't just deaths, they're disruptions. They change the emotional rules. They redraw the lines of what we expect. And in doing so, they make every chapter that follows feel unstable, fragile, and real. As we head deeper into Tier 6, the truth becomes clear. These losses weren't meant to devastate. They were meant to transform, because sometimes the deepest pain is the one that makes you rewrite the map. Absolutely. Here's the next one. 500-word installment of Tier 6. Deaths that changed the story, written in one continuous paragraph with the emotional structure and style you requested. Some deaths sting. Others reshape the future. And then there are the ones that change how the gods themselves move. Let's begin with Zoe Nightshade. Her death in the Titan's curse didn't just break the hunters, it shattered Artemis. Zoe wasn't just a loyal lieutenant. She was her first, her fiercest, her reminder of the ancient world's scars and strength. When Zoe fell after battling her own father Atlas, it wasn't just tragic, it was symbolic. A daughter, silenced by the very Titan she defied. Her last breath gave Artemis clarity, and Percy the sword of the hero. But more than that, it shifted how we saw immortality. The hunters weren't untouchable. They bled, they mourned, and in that moment, the invincibility of the divine cracked and made room for grief. Then came Michael Yu, a name barely whispered outside the last Olympian, but one that mattered. As the Apollo cabin leader, Michael fought bravely and fell from Manhattan's bridges into the Hudson during the battle against Kronos' forces. His death wasn't heroic in the traditional sense. There was no final blow, no slow-motion farewell, but it altered the morale of the entire camp. Apollo kids had to scatter. Strategy broke. Percy had to adapt, and it taught a chilling lesson. Not every hero gets a final scene. Some vanish in the chaos, in the margins, and their loss rewires the battlefield. But speaking of battlefield shocks, let's talk about Luke Castellan, the original traitor, the son of Hermes who betrayed Olympus and then saved it. His death in The Last Olympian wasn't just a plot twist, it was a reversal of everything. Because Luke, in the end, wasn't Kronos. He chose to fight back. He let Annabeth's words in, remembered who he was, and took the blade himself. That moment, Luke stabbing his own Achilles point, changed the conversation around prophecy, destiny, and morality. He wasn't the villain. He was the warning that when the gods neglect their children, monsters rise from within. And by choosing death, Luke forced Olympus to face itself. His sacrifice made the gods swear the pact. It reshaped the future for every demigod that followed. And it made Percy question what true heroism really meant. But some deaths hit closer, some deaths linger, and no one haunts the pages like Selena Beauregard, the bubbly daughter of Aphrodite who turned out to be a spy and then a martyr. After Beckendorf's death, Selena cracked. Her betrayal, meant to save him, had only damned him, so she stepped forward, wore Clarice's armor, rode into battle, and died a hero. Her story wasn't just tragic, it was complicated. A reminder that good people make bad decisions and still deserve redemption. Selena's death shook Clarice into action, changed the tide of the war, and forced every cabin to reevaluate what it means to fight for love. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy, and that's why it mattered. And now, let's dive into the heroes of Olympus, where deaths didn't just change the arc, they changed the tone, like Leo Valdez. For a moment, we believed he was gone. His sacrifice to defeat Jaia was sudden, explosive, and real. And in that final chapter, where he vanished with Festus and Calypso's potion, we felt the weight of his loss. It was the one time Rick Riordan didn't give us immediate hope. We had to sit with it, mourn it, until the epilogue brought him back. Leo's death was the most divisive and discussed moment in the fandom because it worked. It reminded us that even the funny ones, the ones who always had a joke, could fall. And for that day before the twist, the fandom grieved. And what about Reyna? While she doesn't die in the main series, her constant brushes with death, her willingness to sacrifice herself for Nico, to bear the burden of carrying the Athena Parthenos alone. To lead when abandoned created a narrative tension more powerful than any single death. Her story was threaded with the threat of death, and in many ways that made her arc even heavier. Because she survived, but only by carrying the ghosts of others. Her story was shaped by those she lost: Jason, her legion, the countless nameless soldiers of New Rome. Her continued survival felt earned, and that gives every future moment with her a deeper weight. She became a living symbol of survival through sorrow. But then there's the goddess who never made it to the spotlight, Bianca di Angelo, a child of Hades. A sister, a hunter. Her death in the Titan's curse wasn't just a narrative twist, it fractured Nico. It split the story. It sent him spiraling into the shadows, disappearing from the books for entire volumes. Bianca's death wasn't heroic. It was avoidable. She trusted a machine too much. But that small, quiet misjudgment sent ripples through the entire series. Nico became darker, more distant, and his journey back to light was only possible because of her loss. Her death gave birth to one of the deepest character arcs in the entire series. There are deaths you remember, and then there are deaths that rewrite destiny. We can't close this tier without revisiting Bob the Titan, perhaps the most unexpected transformation in the entire series. Once known as Iapetus, Bob was a mindless servant of evil until Percy rewrote his memory with a single word. Bob. That act of mercy in the demigod files birthed something unimaginable, a titan who chose good. In House of Hades, Bob descends with Percy and Annabeth into the darkest corner of the universe, Tartarus, and it is there, in a place where no light exists, that Bob shines. He holds off monsters, he fights his own kind, he chooses to stay behind. His final words, "Tell the stars hello," are not just poetic, they are foundational. They force the reader to see hope in the bleakest abyss, and they change Percy forever. From that moment, every decision Percy makes carries the weight of Bob's loyalty. It proves that monsters can be redeemed, and that sometimes the greatest heroes start as enemies. Then we look to Damasen, a quiet giant, a literal embodiment of contradiction. A monster bred for war, who longed for peace. His partnership with Bob, his sacrifice in the belly of Tartarus, was not just noble, it was literary alchemy. Two characters who should have been side notes became legends, and when they chose to stay behind, to face endless torment for the sake of two demigods. The stakes of this world changed, because now we knew no character was too small to matter. No villain was beyond redemption. Even the monsters were made of grace. But not all shifts in the story come from friendship. Some come from loss so raw it sears the reader like Charles Beckendorf. His death in The Last Olympian is fast, fiery, brutal. He straps himself to a ship and explodes a suicide mission calculated and cold. And yet, the emotional fallout is anything but. Percy survives barely, dragged into the Hudson, and from that moment on, the war is real. Beckendorf's death pushes Percy into rage, into maturity. It eliminates any illusion that demigods are safe, and it haunts Selena, driving her redemption. But most of all, it removes the protective narrative armor. If Beckendorf, brilliant, strong, beloved, could burn, then no one was safe. That tension reshaped the rest of the book. It made every character feel vulnerable. It changed the reader's posture from observer to participant, from hope to dread. And then there's Jason Grace. If Luke was the first seismic death and Leo's was the fake-out, Jason's was the gut punch. No warning, no build-up, just a spear through the chest in the burning maze. It wasn't just that Jason died, it was how suddenly it happened. Heroes don't usually fall in the middle of a journey, and they certainly don't die without fanfare. But Jason's death was silence followed by shock. A core member of the Seven, a child of Jupiter, gone. Just like that. His death shattered Piper, tore Apollo open, and made the readers ask a terrifying question. Is this a different series now? Because it was. Rick Riordan had crossed a new threshold. He'd killed a main character with no prophecy, no foreshadowing, no chance to say goodbye. Jason's death changed how we read every page afterward. It meant there were no rules anymore. And with that revelation came the deepest cut of all, that sometimes being good isn't enough. Sometimes the world takes you anyway. These deaths, Bob, Damison, Beckendorf, Jason, are what separate Percy Jackson from so many other fantasies. They elevate the narrative from a story about heroes to a saga about choices, about consequences, about what it costs to do the right thing. And they force the reader to ask, would I have been that brave? Would I have stayed behind in Tartarus? Would I have pressed the detonator? Would I have stood on that ship knowing the spear was coming? The beauty of Tier 6 isn't in the tears it draws, it's in the shift it causes. After these deaths, the stories never return to what they were. Percy becomes quieter, Annabeth more guarded, Nico more broken, Piper more distant, and us, we grow up too. Because the truth of this tier is that death doesn't just take lives, it gives weight. And as we move forward into the most painful tier yet, some deaths hurt more than others, not because they're more violent or more heroic, but because they break someone else in half. In the world of Percy Jackson, where prophecies steal childhoods and monsters hide in every shadow, it's the siblings who often pay the quietest price and carry the loudest pain. This tier isn't just about those who died, it's about the ones left behind. We begin with Bianca di Angelo, a child of Hades, former hunter of Artemis, and sister to Nico. Her death in the Titan's curse is swift, tragic, and unshakably permanent. She volunteers to retrieve a dangerous artifact inside a mechanical giant. The mission goes wrong. She dies. No prophecy warned her. No one truly stopped her. And Nico, so young, so bright, so hopeful, becomes something else entirely. His grief turns him bitter, then cold, then powerful. Bianca's death forged the Nico we know. Her absence haunted every choice he made. And even years later, her memory still walks beside him. Because Nico never got closure. No burial, no body, just the weight of failure and the poison of guilt. And that's what makes her loss so painful. She wasn't just a sister, she was the last family Nico had. Next is the twin tragedy of Castor and Pollux, sons of Dionysus. When Castor dies in the Battle of the Labyrinth, it doesn't just scar his brother, it scars the god himself. Dionysus, the aloof, wine-drenched prankster, shows rare and terrifying rage. He mourns in silence and fury. And Pollux? He fights harder, colder, lonelier. Twin bonds are deeper than most, so when half is ripped away, the other doesn't just grieve, they shatter. Pollux continues fighting until the end, but his eyes never truly smile again. Then there's Selena Beauregard and Charles Beckendorf, not siblings by blood, but bonded in love and torn apart by fate. Beckendorf dies first, a fiery suicide mission meant to cripple Kronos' navy. Selena, devastated, carries the guilt of her secret that she was once a spy for Kronos. Her arc ends in tragedy. She dons Clarisse's armor, leads a final charge, and dies a hero. But it's too late for closure. The heartbreak isn't just hers, it's Clarice's too. It's the camp's. It's Beckendorf's memory entwined with Selena's redemption. They died loving each other, but never side by side, and the grief they left behind stains Camp Half-Blood like ash. Then we arrive at Luke Castellan. For years, he was the villain, the traitor, the cursed child of Hermes who betrayed Olympus. But underneath that rage was a brother to Thalia, to Annabeth, to the younger campers he once protected. When Luke dies sacrificing himself to destroy Kronos, it's not a villain's end. It's a brother's final act. Annabeth's scream when he falls is more than pain. It's betrayal wrapped in love. It's years of memory crashing in a second. Because despite everything, Luke was once home. To Thalia, he was the boy who saved her. To Annabeth, he was the boy who taught her to fight. And to Hermes, he was the son that no apology could ever save. Luke's death shattered a generation because it reminded them that love and hate are never far apart. But no death in the sibling tier cuts deeper than the one that never should have happened. Zoe Nightshade, the stoic centuries-old hunter of Artemis. Her final stand against her own father, the Titan Atlas, is legendary. But what twists the knife is Thalia's reaction. They weren't sisters by blood, but by bond. Thalia weeps beside Zoe's body, and Artemis lifts her into the stars, creating a constellation. In death, Zoe becomes eternal. But for Thalia, for Artemis, it's a wound that never closes. Zoe wasn't supposed to die, not after centuries of survival, not when the war was just beginning. Her death left a hole in the hunt that no oath could fill, and it left a mark on Thalia that outlasted immortality. But perhaps the quietest grief belongs to Grover. He isn't a brother by blood, but his bond with Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson is nothing short of family. When demigods fall around him, Grover carries their stories. He sings their pain. He remembers the dryads who vanished, the satyrs who never came home, and though he rarely shows it, his grief is ever present, because Grover, unlike most, remembers every name, every tree spirit lost, every friend silenced, every laugh that never echoed again. His is the grief of the forest, ancient, quiet, eternal. These are the deaths that don't just hurt. They haunt, because behind every fallen hero is a brother, a sister, a friend, staring at the spot they used to stand. In this tier, we don't measure pain by blood or battle, we measure it by absence. The silence at dinner, the echo in the training arena, the bunk that no one sleeps in anymore. And that's why sibling grief cuts deepest. It changes everyone. But we're not done yet. Grief changes people, but sibling grief rewrites them. It's not just about who died, it's about who you used to be before they were gone. One of the quietest cases of this is Chris Rodriguez. Once a camper, then a traitor, then redeemed, but always, always remembered by Clarice. We never learn if they were blood siblings, but their bond was deeper than most families. When Chris is driven insane by the labyrinth and dragged back to camp, it's Clarice who fights for him. It's Clarice who stands by him, even when everyone else flinches. And when Chris recovers, it's not just a victory for sanity, it's a resurrection. But Chris doesn't make it to the end. His name doesn't appear in victory speeches. He fades off-page into the background of war. But for Clarice, he's a scar she never talks about. Another sibling lost to a battle that never really ended. And then there's Tyson, the brother Percy didn't want and couldn't live without. Tyson's near-death moments pile up like broken shields. The Cyclops who took a bullet for Percy in the Sea of Monsters. who dove into fire during the Battle of Manhattan, who was always 1 second away from dying, but never did. And that fear of almost is sometimes worse than death. Percy lives in a state of constant dread, the next war, the next fight, the next loss. Because if Tyson ever does die, it won't just be a personal grief. It'll be Percy's final unraveling. And what about Annabeth? Her grief is stitched into her bones. From Thalia's death when she was young, a trauma that carved her into the cold, brilliant strategist we meet in Book 1, to the slow-burning pain of Luke's betrayal and fall. She doesn't just lose people, she loses foundations. Thalia comes back from the dead, yes, but never the same. And the reunion isn't clean. It's not joyful. It's complicated, because when someone you mourn returns, they don't erase the years you spent grieving. That ghost still walks beside you. And then there's Piper and Jason, a duo forged by Hera's schemes, separated by war, trauma, and eventually, death. Jason's death is the thunderclap of the burning maze, sudden, shocking, brutal, no prophecy, no build-up, just gone. And for Piper, it's devastation, not because they were perfect lovers, but because they were something sacred, something chosen. Jason's death shatters Piper's trust in the gods, in herself, in destiny. She spirals, and we watch her fall. She leaves camp, abandons quests. Her grief isn't noble, it's real, messy, angry, lonely. And that's what makes it hurt. Because most books don't show what happens after. Percy Jackson does. Piper's collapse is the sibling grief of this world. It doesn't fade with time. It swallows futures. And just like that, we remember the ones who didn't break, but carried broken pieces. Hazel Levesque, bonded by death to Nico di Angelo. Not siblings by blood, but by the grave. Hazel, who watches Nico fight demons darker than any monster, who understands what it means to be dead and still hurting. And Nico, in turn, shields her like a brother would, because in the underworld, there's no bloodline, only memory. Their bond is protective, soft, earned. And that's why every time one of them is hurt, we feel the other flinch. Because grief doesn't stop at one person. It radiates, a slow detonation of sorrow. Even Grover, whose family is the entire forest, mourns in ways no one sees. When he speaks of Pan, of lost satyrs, of fading spirits, it's not just ecology. It's family. He's watching his siblings disappear, unnamed, unwritten, unremembered. This is what sibling grief means in Percy Jackson. It's not always loud. It's not always poetic. Sometimes it's a shaky breath, a hand resting on an empty bunk, a glance at the stars wondering who's missing them back. These characters don't wear their grief, they carry it. And through them, we learn that heroism isn't surviving a war. It's surviving a loss. Sibling grief isn't always two-sided. Sometimes only one survives. And they're left with all the silence, the guilt, the what if. We see it clearest in Nico di Angelo, a boy who was already a ghost long before he learned how to walk through walls. Bianca's death wasn't just the loss of a sister, it was the loss of trust. The moment she joins the Hunters of Artemis, Nico is left behind. He doesn't understand why. He doesn't get closure. And when she dies, it's off-screen, quiet, quick. But for Nico, it's loud, forever. He falls apart, not in the theatrical way, in the soul-rotting, isolation-drenched way. His powers grow darker. His smile disappears. And what's heartbreaking isn't just that Bianca died. It's that no one else really cared. Not like he did, not like we did. Nico spends years wandering through grief. He dives into the underworld, not to explore but to hide, to find a piece of her he can talk to. But Bianca's gone, fully gone. Even her ghost tells him to let go. And he can't, because she was all he had, the one link to his mortal past. And now he's stuck a son of Hades with no one left to anchor him. His grief turns to anger, then distance, then a brittle strength. And when he finally starts to heal with will, with camp, with quests, it's not because the grief faded, it's because he learned to walk with it. That's the thing about sibling grief. It never disappears. It just finds new ways to echo. In the empty chairs, the unsaid names, the quiet scenes between fights where someone looks down at a necklace or glances at a bunk or stops mid-sentence, and we know. Percy has Tyson, Annabeth had Talia, Clarice had Chris, Nico had Bianca. Some of them survived the loss, some of them didn't, but all of them changed. That's what makes these deaths more painful than the wars, because they're personal, quiet, invisible to anyone not paying attention. And as we leave behind the grief of siblings, we dive headfirst into something even darker. Because while some deaths shattered hearts, others tore through souls. We're going deeper now, past the campfires, past the quests, into the pit, into Tartarus, where the next tier begins. Some deaths hurt, but Tartarus deaths? They haunt. This isn't just where monsters die, it's where souls dissolve, screaming into nothingness. And the worst part? You feel every second of it. Let's go back to the house of Hades. Percy and Annabeth aren't fighting for glory here. They're not even fighting for survival. They're fighting for each other's souls. The moment they fall into Tartarus, everything shifts. The sky isn't blue. The rules don't apply. And death doesn't come fast. It comes slow, biting, dismantling who you are from the inside out. Every inch of Tartarus is soaked in the screams of those who've perished. You can hear the echoes, smell the despair, and when we talk about death in Tartarus, we don't just mean the body stopping. We mean identity ripped apart piece by piece. That's what happens to Bob. Remember Bob, the Titan who was reborn as a janitor, who chose to help Percy, who chose kindness when everything in his nature said destroy. In Tartarus, Bob dies twice. First, in the eyes of the gods forgotten, erased. Then again, in the pit stabbed, swarmed, consumed, left behind. But the part that stings isn't just that he died. It's how he smiled through it. How he said, "Tell the stars hello," as if that was enough. As if kindness could be its own reward, and maybe it was. But it didn't stop the hurt. Didn't stop the silence after. Didn't stop us from wondering, why did it have to be him? Why does it always have to be the gentle ones? The second death that ripped through Tartarus was Damascene, a giant who should have been the enemy, who was born to destroy. But instead, he cooked, he healed, he listened. And when it mattered most, he fought for Percy and Annabeth. Damascene went down swinging, his death echoing like a prayer against the pit's endless void. But just like Bob, he was too good for that place, too pure for a death that cruel. It's in Tartarus that we finally realize not all monsters are monsters, and not all heroes survive like they should. Death here doesn't just mark an end, it rewrites everything. It blurs the line between right and wrong, villain and friend. And what makes these deaths different is that you feel them rot. The air gets colder, the pages get heavier, the hope flickers, and you want to scream not at the bad guys, but at fate itself. Because no amount of training, no prophecy, no divine gift prepares you for the moment someone chooses to die, just so someone else might live. That's Tartarus, not just a battlefield, a graveyard of the kindest souls. And we're only just getting started, because the deeper you go, the more the pit remembers, and the more it takes. You think Tartarus has limits? That after Bob and Damascene the pit has taken enough? Think again. Because Tartarus isn't a place where death happens, it's a place where death lingers. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the name Aklis, a goddess of misery, of poison, of decay. She doesn't kill you with blades or claws. She kills you with despair. When Percy faces her, it's not just his strength that's tested, it's his soul. She forces him to become something he never wanted to be. A killer, a weapon, a reflection of the pit itself. And in that moment, when Percy summons the poison and lets it fill his veins, a part of him dies. It's not a death with blood and screams. It's a death of innocence, a death of mercy. Percy becomes unrecognizable, and that's the cost of survival in Tartarus. Pieces of yourself, sacrificed just to breathe. And then there's Annabeth. Her pain doesn't come from a weapon, it comes from watching the boy she loves break. She holds his hand as he rages, as he melts a goddess into nothing, as his eyes go dark. And she can't stop it, can't undo it. That helplessness, that emotional death, it might be worse than any blade. Because in Tartarus, love isn't enough, loyalty isn't enough, even heroism isn't enough. Every step forward is paid in loss, and every name you forget on the way. Tartarus remembers. Think about the monsters, the hundreds of faceless beasts Percy and Annabeth have slain. In Tartarus, they come back, again and again and again. Every kill is reversed, every fight reloaded. It's a graveyard on repeat, which means every death they deliver, useless. Every scream they hear, familiar. Every breath they take is just a countdown to someone else's suffering. And that is where Tartarus changes everything. It cheapens death while making it feel eternal. You're trapped in a place where the people who helped you can't be saved. And the monsters you hate, they never really die, which makes the actual deaths, the permanent ones, feel 1,000 times heavier. Bob isn't coming back. Damascene isn't regenerating. They chose their end, and Tartarus made sure it meant something by making everything else meaningless. That's the paradox of the pit. Everything dies, and nothing stays dead, except for the ones who should have lived. And when Percy and Annabeth finally escape, there's a silence. Not a triumphant one, not a relieved one. A haunted silence because they made it out, but they left souls behind. Souls that were kind. Souls that deserved better. And those deaths, you don't just remember them. You carry them, you feel them, you grieve them, not because they were flashy or famous, but because they were quiet, brave, and utterly, devastatingly real. Tartarus isn't just a setting, it's a mass grave, a wound in the world, and it doesn't forget. There's one more thing about Tartarus no one warns you about. It's not just the place that kills you. It's the memories. The people you couldn't save. The ones who gave everything so you could keep going. Percy and Annabeth left Tartarus alive, yes. But they didn't leave whole. And maybe they never will. Because when Bob looked back and said, "Tell the stars hello," it wasn't just a final line. It was a goodbye to hope, a god of the underworld choosing to stand in the dark forever, so that his friends could see the sun again. And Damascene, the gentle giant, the dragon slayer who hated violence, he returned to the battle he never wanted, and died with love in his heart. These weren't just allies, they were mirrors, proof that even the most broken creatures could choose to be better. And that's what Tartarus demands from you. It tests your morality, tempts your worst instincts, and then offers you a way out, at the cost of your soul. Percy became poison. Annabeth became steel. But Bob and Damascene, they became legends. Quiet ones. Ones without statues or songs. But the kind that live in you forever. Because even as the pit closes behind them, even as their names fade from the surface world, their stories cling to your ribs. You can't shake the image of Bob smiling as the darkness swallows him. You can't forget the moment Damascene roared in defiance against a god who never forgave him. These aren't just character deaths. They are moral turning points. The kind that force you to ask yourself, what would I have done? And that's why Tartarus hits harder than any battlefield. Because it's not about weapons. It's about witnessing sacrifice and living with the guilt that you walked away when others didn't. And when Percy and Annabeth finally see the stars again, there's no celebration, just breath, just grief, just silence. And maybe that's the point, that even in a world of monsters, prophecy, and gods, the deepest pain still comes from love, from watching good people disappear into the abyss so that someone else might live. Tartarus teaches us that the loudest deaths aren't always the most painful. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones whispered, the ones that echo when everything else is gone. And just when you think the series couldn't rip your soul any deeper, the story shifts. Because the next set of deaths, they weren't distant, they weren't sacrificial. They were personal, raw, real. These were the moments when the readers themselves broke, the ones we felt in our bones. You always remember where you were when it happened, the line, the moment, the breath you didn't take. Maybe it was when Zoe Nightshade whispered her last under the stars she once called sisters, or when Selena Beauregard died trying to undo the betrayal that broke her. These weren't just deaths, they were emotional ruptures, not sacrifices from a distance, but characters you knew, who laughed with you, fought beside you, held pieces of your heart, the kind of characters who weren't designed to die, but whose deaths reshaped the story forever. And that's the thing about reader heartbreak. It's never clean. It's messy, complicated. You hated Luke Castellan for 3 books, called him a traitor, a villain, a pawn of Kronos. And then he chose redemption. He chose to die as a hero. And suddenly, the boy who tried to destroy Olympus became the one who saved it. What do you even do with that kind of pain? It's not satisfying. It's not victorious. It just hurts. Because it's not just about who dies. It's about how they die and why. Ethan Nakamura's death wasn't cinematic. It was tragic. A boy raised on revenge, caught between loyalty to his mother and a system that never gave him a chance. When he tried to stop Kronos, he was already too far gone. And still, he tried. That moment, that instant of resistance was his entire character arc, compressed into one fatal heartbeat. These aren't epic battles. These are emotional landmines. You didn't expect Charles Beckendorf to go out like that alone, on a suicide mission, with nothing but a timed explosive and a kiss goodbye. But that's what made it unforgettable. That image of Percy realizing Beckendorf's gone. That grief hitting mid-battle. You felt it because the loss didn't wait. It just happened. And then there's Zoe. Oh, Zoe. The immortal hunter who gave up everything, her family, her past, her future, to fight for a world that barely remembered her name. She didn't get applause. She didn't get fanfare. She got poisoned, alone, on a mountaintop, whispering to Artemis with her final breath, and somehow that still mattered more than 1,000 demigod victories. It was quiet. It was poetic. It was crushing. You wanted her to win. You thought she'd make it. And that's why it broke you. Reader heartbreak doesn't ask your permission. It just shows up between pages under dialogue when you least expect it. And when it hits, It rewrites the entire emotional language of the series. Every joke feels darker, every prophecy heavier, because you now know what's possible and what's permanent. These aren't just deaths. They're reminders that Rick Riordan wasn't afraid to hurt us, and that sometimes the pain made the story realer. And what's worse, it's not over. You didn't just lose a character, you lost someone you rooted for. Someone whose smile lived in the margins, whose pain echoed long after the page turned. Take Silena Beauregard. She wasn't the perfect heroine. She lied, she froze, she made mistakes. But isn't that why she mattered? Because when the battle came, she chose courage over comfort. She rode out wearing Clarice's armor not for glory, but to make things right, to reclaim her own narrative. And when the Drakon cut her down, it didn't feel like a plot twist. It felt like a punishment too cruel for a girl who'd already carried too much. Or what about Bianca di Angelo? A child, really. A sister. A protector. Thrust into a world she barely understood, trying to give her brother a better chance. You watched her try so hard to be older than she was, to be brave, to be selfless, and when she joined the Hunters, you thought maybe she'd be safe. But she wasn't. She died alone, in a mechanical giant's belly, not knowing if Nico would be okay. And the worst part, she was forgotten by the gods. That's what broke you. Not just that she died, but that her sacrifice felt ignored. Like the world just moved on, and Nico was left holding the weight. You felt that ache, especially when he refused to talk about her, because you knew some grief is too deep for words. And then there's Bob. Yes, Bob. The Titan who once tried to destroy the gods and got his memory wiped, who learned kindness from a son of Hades, who talked to cats and held the sky and said, Bob is happy to help, even when he was marching into certain death. His entire redemption arc was quiet, tragic, and profoundly human. When he turned and said, tell the stars hello, we all broke, because he didn't have to be good. He just chose to be. And that made his death hurt in ways few others ever could. There was no big reward, no statue, no prophecy, just Bob. Lost in the darkness of Tartarus, with only Damascene by his side, fighting to hold the line for friends who might not even remember him. That's what real heartbreak looks like. It's not a scream, it's a whisper, a last line, a quiet sacrifice, and a silence that lingers long after the book ends. Even the villains hurt us. Ethan Nakamura, as we've said, wasn't a hero, but he wasn't evil either. He was a kid trying to make sense of a broken world, his mother abandoned by the gods, his allegiance manipulated, and yet he still tried in the very end to do one right thing. That moment of resistance, that brief flicker of light before Kronos ended him. It stuck. It said, not all monsters wear claws, some are just boys who weren't loved enough. And when Luke fell, when Annabeth placed his knife in his hand and he drove it into its own weak spot to stop the monster inside him, you didn't know how to feel. Relief, grief, forgiveness, rage. That's the magic of reader heartbreak. It complicates you. It makes you sit in that pain. Process it. Grow with it. And then there's Michael Yu, a name most readers barely register, a son of Apollo, a loyal soldier, gone in a flash of war, no last words, no fanfare, just absence. And yet you felt it. You felt it in Will Solis's voice, and in the silence after the battle, in the reminder that even sunlight has shadows. These are the losses that didn't just serve the story, they haunted it. And as readers, we carried them. We still carry carry them. Because these weren't just character deaths, they were emotional scars. You thought you were prepared after all. Demigods die all the time, but nothing could have prepared you for the deaths that felt personal. The ones where the writing slowed down, not to glorify the sacrifice, but to let the grief breathe. Take Zoe Nightshade, a hunter of Artemis, an immortal warrior who had lived through centuries of battles and betrayals, only to fall not in some grand war, but because of a poisoned wound from her own father, Atlas. Her final moments weren't triumphant. They were soft. She stared up at the stars, whispered her goodbyes to Artemis, and faded like stardust. It wasn't just her death that hit you, it was the stillness afterward. The sudden quiet in the group, the way Percy narrated it without embellishment, like he too was holding back tears. And then there was Beckendorf, sweet, sturdy, dependable Charles Beckendorf. The kind of demigod who never wanted to be a main character, who loved his girlfriend, made his explosives, and held the entire camp together with quiet, golden loyalty. His final act, detonating the Princess Andromeda to sabotage Kronos' army, was undeniably heroic. But the pain came in the timing. He died at the very beginning of The Last Olympian, setting the tone for a book drenched in loss. You could feel Percy's survivor's guilt bleeding off the page, and you knew this was just the first crack in the dam. Speaking of early exits, remember Lee Fletcher? Probably not. That's the point. A son of Apollo, killed by a giant during the Battle of the Labyrinth. No epic speech, no final wish, just a name screamed in the middle of chaos, then silence. And it was that very brevity that broke you, because it reminded you that some demigods don't get arcs. They get erased in war. But it wasn't always the battlefield that hurt. Sometimes it was the intent. The way Celine McCaffrey's death in Trials of Apollo felt like a rug pull. A character introduced just long enough to warm your heart, only to be used as a narrative gut punch. And yet, you mourned her, because her loss reminded you that in Rick Riordan's world, no one is safe just because they're kind. Then came the big one, Jason Grace. His death wasn't just shocking, it was divisive. Some called it cheap, others called it brave. But no matter which side you fell on, the impact was nuclear. Jason had been the face of the Roman half of the saga. A praetor, a leader, a hero who struggled with identity and loyalty, but always put duty first. When he died protecting his friends, facing impossible odds, it wasn't just him that died. It was an era. And what made it worse? There was no prophecy, no build-up. He was just gone. One moment, flying through the air, the next pierced by imperial gold. And the silence that followed wasn't filled with music or fanfare. It was filled with Leo's scream, with Piper's disbelief, with readers rereading the page, not believing it. That's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't ask your permission. It invades. And then, of course, there's the one that still hurts the most. Pan. Yes, the god. The great god Pan. The death that wasn't violent, but philosophical. Pan didn't die in battle. He faded a result of the world's neglect, of our neglect. He didn't scream or fight. He simply looked at Grover and said, "I'm sorry, my time is long past." And that broke everyone, because it was the first death in the series that felt real. A metaphor for extinction, for climate grief, for fading culture and forgotten magic. Pan's death wasn't just about a god. It was about us, about what we lose when we stop believing, stop listening, stop caring. That's what made it linger. Not the drama, but the quiet. And in that quiet, you realized something. The Percy Jackson series didn't just kill characters to advance the plot. It killed them to make you feel, to teach you what sacrifice really meant. And just when you think you've built up enough emotional armor, that you've cried your last tear over Jason or Zoe or Beckendorf, the series dares to hit you with something different, a goodbye that you helped write. Bob, the titan who once held up the sky, the one Percy once fought and wiped clean with a river. But when we meet him again in House of Hades, he's not a villain. He's a blank slate who chooses kindness, who befriends a cat, who says Bob is happy, like a child learning what joy is for the first time. And when it comes time for Bob to make a choice, to either escape or hold the line against the monsters in Tartarus, he chooses death. He chooses to stay behind and protect Percy and Annabeth, not because a prophecy told him to, but because he wanted to. His final words, "Tell the sun hello," and there's something about that line that wrecks you. Maybe it's the innocence. Maybe it's the fact that he'll never see light again. Maybe it's because you know he'll be forgotten by the gods. But you won't forget him. And that's the power of these heartbreaks. They don't just stab once. They linger. Ethan Nakamura, the boy who spent his life trying to avenge the forgotten, only to realize too late that Kronos was using him. His death was a turning point, not because of who he was, but because of what he represented. A child of Nemesis, a demigod who wanted balance, not power. And when he turned on Kronos and got struck down, it wasn't glorious. It was tragic. He saw the truth too late. But we didn't. Then there was Michael Yu. His death wasn't even described, we just learn he was lost in battle. That silence around his end says more than words ever could. It tells us that not every death gets a moment, not every loss gets a chapter. Sometimes the people who mattered to us just disappear, and it hurts. And in the margins of all these deaths is a character we barely knew, but whose story still makes us ache, Selena Beauregard. The daughter of Aphrodite who lived with guilt, who was a spy, who was trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. Her final act leading the Ares cabin into battle was a redemption arc forged in fire. But even as she died a hero, her guilt haunted the camp. Her story reminded us that betrayal doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from love, from fear, from being human. And when she collapsed, armor-dented, mascara running, the tragedy wasn't that she died. It was that she tried so hard to fix it, and she didn't make it in time. But perhaps the most haunting heartbreak isn't any one death. It's the weight of all of them. The accumulated grief that Percy, Annabeth, Nico, Leo, Hazel, and so many others carry on their shoulders. It's not just about who died. It's about who survived. It's about Nico's 1,000-yard stare, Annabeth's trembling hand, Percy's silence when asked about the war. The heartbreak is that they have to keep going, that no one remembers Lee Fletcher or Castor or Dakota or Jake Mason, but they do. The heartbreak is that for every glorious victory, 100 ghosts follow behind. And as we close this tier, this long, painful catalogue of tears and pages stained with grief, we come to something deeper, something darker. These weren't just deaths we mourned, they were deaths that shook the world, deaths that rippled across Olympus, that rewrote fate, that made gods weep and mortals scream, and stories split into before and after. These are the moments that took what we knew and shattered it. These are not just character deaths. These are world breakers. There are deaths that make you cry, and then there are deaths that make the world stop spinning, even if just for a breath. These are the ones that rewrite fate, reshape characters, and leave silence echoing through every page that follows. And when it comes to the world of Percy Jackson, one death stands above all others, the death of Luke Castellan. Because Luke wasn't just a traitor, he wasn't just a villain. He was a child of Hermes, a brother to Talia, a boy who felt abandoned by the gods, who let his resentment rot into rage, who opened himself to Kronos not because he was evil, but because he was hurt. And in the end, Luke dies not with a sword in hand, but with a decision. He makes the hardest choice anyone could make. He kills himself to stop Kronos from taking over. He becomes the hero of the prophecy, not Percy. And that twist, that betrayal of destiny, breaks everything we thought we knew. It redefines what heroism looks like. It shows us that no one is beyond redemption, and that sometimes the world doesn't break when someone dies. It breaks when they choose to die for all the right reasons. Luke's death didn't just end a war, it started a ripple of grief, reflection, and forgiveness that shaped how every demigod after him viewed the gods, their loyalties, and their pain. But Luke's wasn't the only death that bent the world in half. There was Bianca di Angelo, Nico's sister. Her death was quick, too quick. She joined the hunters. She went on a quest. She didn't make it. A metal giant crushed her and left Nico alone, truly alone. But her death wasn't just tragic. It unleashed something. It cracked Nico's heart and let the shadows in. That one moment set him down a path of bitterness, isolation, and deep mythic sorrow that would define him for years. It wasn't just a loss of life. It was the death of innocence, and for Nico, it was the start of Tartarus long before he ever physically stepped into that pit. And then there's Calypso. Not her death, but her trapped eternity. Because sometimes, in this world, death is kinder than what the immortals suffer. She waited for thousands of years, and when someone finally came to her island, Percy, then Leo, the pain wasn't in watching them leave. It was in being left behind, over and over again. Her loneliness is a death stretched over millennia, and it hurts because we feel it. We feel her stillness, her bitterness, her slow smile, and her even slower heartbreak. Her agony doesn't explode, it simmers. It rewrites what we think a death is. And then came Bob. Again. Because if Luke was redemption, and Bianca was loss, and Calypso was eternal sorrow, then Bob was sacrifice. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because in the darkest place imaginable, Tartarus, where even hope dies, Bob stood tall. A titan with no memory, no reward, no prophecy, no family. And still, he chose to protect, to stay, to die in a place no soul should die. His last words weren't screamed. They were whispered. Tell the sun hello. And in those 4 words, the world cracked. Not with thunder or war, but with gentleness. A kind titan died alone in a pit of monsters, and we knew deep in our bones that this world was no longer the same. These deaths, these unbearable moments shattered something beyond the page. They weren't just character exits, they were turning points in the emotional architecture of this universe. They changed Percy, they changed Annabeth, they changed us. Because sometimes the deepest pain isn't from the loudest deaths. It's from the quiet ones, the redemptions, the betrayals, the silent goodbyes in monster-filled pits. And in those moments, we didn't just lose a character, we lost something inside ourselves, something hopeful, something childlike. But pain like this doesn't exist in a vacuum. These deaths didn't just break the world for the reader, they broke families within the story. You don't realize how much a death can haunt a story until it keeps coming back in dreams, in flashbacks, in scars no one talks about. That's what happens with Selena Beauregard, the daughter of Aphrodite, who was never supposed to be a warrior, never supposed to wear armor, never supposed to die. And yet, she did. Not in the beginning, not in the middle, but right at the end when things were finally turning around. She had been a spy for Kronos, misled and manipulated, trying to make things right. And in the Battle of Manhattan, she stepped into Clarissa's armor and charged into battle to reclaim her honor. That moment, that choice, that fire, it wasn't just redemption. It was sacrifice fueled by love. Love for Beckendorf. Love for Camp Half-Blood. Love for the truth. Her death wasn't clean. It wasn't poetic, but it was hers. And when she fell, something shifted. Not just in the battle, but in Aphrodite's cabin, in Clarissa's heart, in Percy's understanding of what a hero really looks like. Selena's death taught us that pain isn't exclusive to the brave or the bold. It finds the soft ones too, and it makes them shine before they break. But then came the death that ripped open the universe, the one even the gods feared. Jason Grace, son of Jupiter, praetor of New Rome, a leader, a symbol, a legend. And in one bolt of imperial gold, he was gone. No warning, no prophecy, no resurrection. Just gone. And it didn't just hurt, it shocked the fandom. Because Jason wasn't supposed to die. He had plot armor, leadership armor, godly armor. But in the trials of Apollo, when he takes a spear through the chest, he does it knowing full well what it will cost. He dies to save Piper and Apollo. And more importantly, he accepts it. There is no rage, no panic, just resolve. And that's what makes it so brutal. Because Jason was finally becoming himself, not what the gods wanted, not what Camp Jupiter needed, not what Rome demanded, just Jason, free. And then the story takes him away. That's when we realized no one is safe, not even the icons, not even the ones who checked all the boxes. And maybe that's the final twist, that heroes don't always go out in glory. Sometimes they just go, and the world doesn't stop. It keeps spinning, and that somehow hurts even more. But that's the power of these deaths. They don't just make you cry, they rearrange you. They leave shadows that linger in every quest, every dream, every quiet campfire scene after. They change how the surviving characters breathe. And they change you. Because when a world this magical lets its heroes fall, not just for plot, but for meaning, you understand what's at stake. You understand why Percy fights the way he does, why Annabeth breaks the way she does, why Nico isolates, why Thalia hardens, why Leo smiles through grief. These deaths weren't filler, they were foundations, and in a world of monsters and myths, they were the one thing more powerful than prophecy. Pain with purpose. But even now, after all the battles and sacrifices and whispered goodbyes, there's one more truth we can't ignore. These deaths aren't just part of the story. They're the reason the story matters. And that's where we're going next. To the ones we carried. The ones we grieved for in real life. The deaths that hit harder than they should have. Because they weren't just characters. They were family, reflections, friends, us. And when they died, we didn't just close the book. We broke with it. So now we reach the end, not of the story, but of the impact. Some deaths stay on the page, others follow you. This video wasn't just a ranking, it was a quiet funeral for every name we couldn't forget. Because if you've made it this far, then you already know. Percy Jackson isn't just a story about gods and monsters. It's a story about loss, about how even in the middle of magic and prophecy and war, people still die. And when they do, it hurts. Not because they were perfect, but because they mattered. We grieved Bianca di Angelo not just because she was young, but because she chose to leave her brother behind and paid the price. We broke for Selena because she loved too hard, too late. We remembered Charles Beckendorf because he smiled right before he blew himself up. And we still ache for Jason Grace, not just because he died, but because he deserved more. These stories left us hollow and full all at once, because behind every death was a reminder. Being a hero doesn't save you from pain. In fact, it demands it. And in the quiet pages after every goodbye, Rick Riordan taught us something no god ever could, that grief is the proof that love was real, that mourning is what makes memory sacred, and that no matter how many demigods fall, they don't disappear. They become part of the story, part of us. And maybe that's the real ending. Not who lived, not who died, but who we carried. So now it's your turn. Who hit you the hardest? Which death still echoes in your bones? Let us know in the comments. Because these aren't just rankings. They're remembrances, and every time we speak their names again, they come back, even if just for a moment. So keep remembering, keep feeling, and above all, keep reading. Because the greatest stories don't just end, they haunt